Okay, today we're going to be working with language skills and how to comment on a text. Very often task 1 on an exam paper will ask you to read a text and then to write something about the language used in the text. And it's important to remember then that it's asking you how something is written, not what is written. So you don't need to offer up an opinion on the content, don't have to explain what is written in the text, but you have to explain how it is written and how something is being communicated using different kind of language skills. Today we're going to be talking about readability and style of writing. These are two sides of the same thing really, because the style of writing will affect the readability of a text and vice versa. When we speak about readability, very often we are talking about how easy or how complex a text is. Is something very easy to read and understand, or is it very difficult? And often the style of writing will determine whether or not something is difficult. And style of writing, when we talk about style of writing, we are often talking about how formal a text is or how informal a text is. If you take a look at these two examples of text here, A and B, they are both communicating more or less the same information, but a quick read of these two texts will and you can notice that text B is a lot easier to understand, and text A is more complex. And if we look closely at text A, we can point to some features that make it more difficult to understand. For example, in text A, they use a lot more difficult words. Highlighted in green, for example, you see the words conceded and stanched. These are not words you would use in everyday language, and perhaps you'd even have to look them up in a dictionary to understand the meaning of the words. We see some examples of nominalization, which is when you take verbs and turn them into nouns. Normally we would use rupture and spill as verbs, to rupture, to spill. But in this case, they are now used as nouns and as their rupture and their spill. Also, whether or not the sentences are long or short will affect readability of the text. And here you see there are very long sentences. Highlighted in yellow is all one sentence. And this makes it more difficult to read and understand the text. So these are things that you could comment on in a text. We're going to also have a look at the style of writing, and by style of writing we very often speak about, is a text very formal, is it very informal? And to determine whether or not a text is formal or how formal it is, you can look at the words used. Are there many difficult words? Is the language personal or impersonal? Do they use a lot of personal pronouns like I, we? Or do they try to avoid them? What kind of verb forms are being used, passive or active verb forms? And what kind of sentences are being used? Are they declarative sentence, or are they more interactive sentences such as questions and such? And also in a formal text, you would very rarely use contracted forms such as I'm or didn't and you'll, but in informal text you can use these forms. To explain more in detail, by learned words or more difficult words, you can examine the text to see how many difficult words or complex words they use in the text. I've given you here two examples, example 1, example 2. They don't give you the same information. Example 1 is, for example, what you would perhaps understand as a letter from a publishing company to a writer, and example 2 is a letter from perhaps the writer to a friend. And the language styles will therefore be very different. So in the first example, you see a lot more difficult words, and some of these words you might have to look up, or you wouldn't necessarily use in everyday language. Inform, rejected, required, reconsider, and necessary. And in example 2, you would see more everyday words, more idioms, and maybe even some slang. In the second text, for example, you see add-ons in the sentences. Well, the publishing company rejected it, but hey, I did the best I could, and I'm not gonna redo it in the way they said I should. Gonna is a very typical giveaway here. This is something that you would normally say and not write, the contracted form or colloquial form of going to. By impersonal language, again, you can see both texts use personal pronouns, but the second example uses a lot more personal pronouns. I've also underlined an example of a passive verb form. In the first example, you can see they use passive verb forms. The book has been rejected. And also you get a more direct and personal style of writing in example 2. You know, that book I wrote, well, the publishing company rejected it, etc. The sentence type also matters when you comment on the language used in the text, and especially when deciding whether or not a text is more formal or less formal. And as you can see, the first text basically consists of 2 sentences, and both are declarative sentences giving you information, and whereas the second example is more interactive. They are asking you some questions. You know, that book I wrote, and also you get a lot more fragments, but hey, I did the best I could and I think it was great. Finally, if you have difficulty deciding the sentence type, this form will help you with that. The declarative sentence would normally give you information. You would use normal word order, which means that basically the subject would come before the verb in the sentence, whereas interrogative sentences, you would have the inverted word order, where you would have the verb first and then the subject. And it's a sentence type. It will be asking for information, either a yes or no answer or specific information. And in addition, you also have imperative. This is a type of subject, a type of sentence that demands that you do something. Send the letter, you have to take action. These sentences can be either very short, or you can add on features such as please, send the letter quickly, and it's still an imperative sentence. Okay, that's all for now. After this, you will be left to your own devices and working on tasks, trying to solve tasks where you comment on the language used.